Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and in the last 130 interviews with veterans, I found out that veterans can do pretty much anything in their civilian career, but very often they underestimate what it takes to get there. So each week in discussions, interviews, and different topics, we dive into different tools to help veterans figure out what they want to do in their civilian career and how to get there. Today's episode number 139 with Bunker Labs founder and CEO, Todd Connor.
We tend to retrospectively tell a very clean story about how it all happened. And he went to business school, then he started a business, and then he started the bunker, and it's all very successful. And I just think it's important to acknowledge, no, it's not all successful. The Alumni Association wasn't trying to call me after I quit a consulting job and started my own boutique professional services business. They weren't calling after I ran for office and lost. But that those are super important core elements of what I've learned as an adult and what we're doing today as an organization. And that, I really celebrate all those things as they carry forward.
Well, today was one of those interviews where I feel like we cut things short with, 2 or 3 more hours of potential questions we could dive into. Todd is an awesome guy. He has a very atypical career path going from the Navy to becoming a founder of Bunker Labs. And one of the things I really enjoyed about our conversation was his candor in talking about all the failures and mistakes that made him stronger and helped him to get to where he is today, and how often that's true for both veterans and civilians, where the path to where we end up is so circuitous, it's so winding, and it's not a clear, straight path. I think this is a great episode. First of all, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, Bunker Labs is an incredible asset, an incredible free tool for veterans to utilize to figure out how to start a company, whether that's your 6th attempt or your very first, whether you've been out of the military for 20 years or you're just getting out. It's a great resource, though, for people who are not interested in entrepreneurship as well. I think that John's story in this interview is really helpful in just figuring out how to take risks, how to adopt a learning mindset, how to really stop caring what people think and pursuing what you want, and pursuing it as a long game, not trying to get there immediately. Be willing to take a step back and be willing to just roll up your sleeves to ultimately get to where you want. There's a quick plug at the end of this episode. We talk about a cohort that Bunker Labs is launching in January. It's an online lab. It's a 12-week process about starting a company. So for those of you interested in entrepreneurship, I would encourage you to check out the show notes. I'll have a link there, or go over to Bunker Labs and check that out. As always, at beyondtheuniform.io, you'll find show notes with links to all the different books and resources that we discussed today. You'll also find a tab for events. A reminder, there'll be a couple different events that we're doing online in January, Veterans in Consulting and Reprogramming. Definitely go ahead and sign up for those, pre-register for those today to figure out when those are going to launch. And then lastly, if you haven't had a chance to leave us an online review with iTunes, would greatly, greatly appreciate that. It helps me get the word out to other veterans about this as a free resource for them to use as they think about their career. So with that, let's dive in to my interview with Todd Connor. Well, joining me today in Chicago, Illinois is Todd Connor. Todd, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thank you, Justin. Great to be with you.
Well, longtime listeners will remember way back 100 episodes ago, in episode number 38, I spoke with Chris Shaw, and he talked about his work as the director of the New York office of Bunker Labs. My guest today is the founder of Bunker Labs, and I'm very excited to hear his story and more about Bunker Labs because I think it's something that could help a lot of listeners. For background on Todd, he is the CEO and founder of Bunker Labs, which is an organization that helps military veterans start and grow businesses. He is also the co-founder of the Collective Academy. He started out at Northwestern University, after which he served as a surface warfare officer in the Navy for 4 years. After his transition from the Navy, he held positions with the State of Illinois Inspector General, McMaster Carr, Booz Allen Hamilton, and the Chicago Public Schools. He holds an MBA from the Chicago Booth School of Business. So, Todd, maybe to start things off, anything to add or amend to that intro?
No, man, you covered it. You know, the only thing I would say is I think I'm going to get sort of meta with you out of the gate, but I think it's easy when you read people's resumes to confuse causation with correlation. And I was speaking at the business school at the University of Chicago Business School where I went, and I was actually doing an interview with the Alumni Magazine. They said, talk about how Booth prepared you for the entrepreneurship journey that you've had. And I was a little bit contrarian. I said, to be honest, I said, I'm not sure Booth was the thing that prepared me for what I did. I mean, I was 1 year out of business school in a corporate consulting job, which is the job that a lot of people want coming out of Booth. The joke is you can do anything in the world you want to do as long as it's finance or consulting. And I was 1 year out of business school into a job, and I quit. And I was like, look, this is great. The money's good, but I want to start my own business, and I don't know how to do that. And I also want to run for office, and I don't know how to do that. And the only way I know how to do it is to go and quit and try. And so it put me on this journey. And I joked with the Alumni Magazine that, I did things for, 6 or 7 years after business school that, nothing that the Alumni Magazine was interested in writing about. It was like, failure after failure. And then, at some point you start to have successes. And I think, resumes become one of these things or bios, if you will, become one of these things where we tend to retrospectively tell a very clean story about how it all happened. And he went to business school, then he started a business, and then he started the bunker, and it's all very successful. And I just think it's important to acknowledge, no, it's not all successful. The Alumni Association wasn't trying to call me after I quit a consulting job and started my own, boutique professional services business. They weren't calling after I ran for office and lost. But that those are super important core elements of what I've learned as an adult and what we're doing today as an organization. And that, I really celebrate all those things as they carry forward. So just know that, if you're on active duty and you're thinking about how do I get to where I'm trying to go, don't expect an honest story from your heroes about how they got there. Because I think a lot of the messy details get glossed over with time, but they're important. They're really important to how you end up where you want to be.
That's great. I really appreciate your candor on that, and it's something I'm still trying to figure out how to reconcile for the veteran community. In that, I know from my last 10 years that and 130 plus interviews here that failures are where the juice is. Failure is where we're out of our comfort zone, where we're learning and we're preparing for whatever greatness awaits us. And at the same time, we come from a background, at least in my experience in the military, where failure is something that you avoid at all cost, where failure can cost lives, failures can cost billions of dollars of equipment, and failures can, completely ruin a career. And so I appreciate your opening up about the challenges you faced. And I hope we get into more of those as the conversation goes on. But I think it's great. And I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, that so often in these stories, it's kind of like that Seinfeld yada, yada, yada. It's like so much happens in the yada, 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 but that's, people gloss over the pitfalls and the chasms that they fall into, and the doubt and the just confusion, and we just see the outcome, overlooking the years or even decades of wandering in the wilderness that made that achievement possible.
Oh, totally. It's so important. And the wandering in the wilderness is where I really think the research and the discovery happens. I mean, there are ideas that we apply at the Bunker Labs that have been percolating and marinating in the background for years, where it's like finally you begin to do pattern recognition and say, this thing that I learned probably through failure, 7 years ago has applicability to how we're thinking about doing what we're doing today. And so it's important that entrepreneurs shift their mindset from an achievement mindset. And this is very hard, I think, for the military folks, but you have to shift your mindset from an achievement mindset to a learning mindset. So an achievement mindset says the goal is to get it right and the goal is to win. A learning mindset says the goal is to discover. And if we're in an achievement mindset, we're unlikely to take risks. We're unlikely to, do something reputationally that we think makes us look bad. If our goal is a learning mindset, we're much more likely to take the risk. We're much more likely to discover something. We're much more likely, I was talking to somebody that was a retired '06, and they said, my wife and I were thinking about opening up a bakery. I said, have you gone and worked at a bakery? And he was like, well, no, I think that's, no, haven't thought about that. And I said, well, go get a job at a bakery. I mean, go actually get a job at several bakeries, right? And the notion of like, but I'm an '06, and it's one thing to own a bakery, it's another thing to work at a bakery. But that's the best way to learn, is by going and doing. And so I think ego really can get in the way of our ability to be in a discovery state of mind. But because we put ourselves out there, we subject ourselves to ridicule or what we think is embarrassment. But the reality is, if we're in a state of learning, then the best stuff comes from trying and failing, because that's actually where we learn the most. And so I think that's a different mentality, I think, than what we're taught often in the military. But it's one that I think matters when it comes to starting your own business.
Is there any exercise or practice or way that you found help you and others adopt that learning mindset that you could recommend for listeners?
We're actually just putting together sort of like a year-end reading list for the Bunker Labs national leadership team, which includes about 45 entrepreneurs and leaders from across the country that run the 17 chapters. And one of the books that I think is terrific is a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck is a professor at Stanford, studies behavioral psychology. And she's really defined in a much more eloquent way than I just have, this difference between what she calls a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And the growth mindset says that the goal is learning. Fixed mindset says the goal is achieving. And she's really done a lot of research to catalog high-performing teams, high-performing individuals, and how high-performing teams and individuals sort of inculcate the growth mindset as a way of operating, and so I think it's great, and I think it has a lot of application for entrepreneurs. So yeah, if you want to have a deeper dive on that conversation, I would recommend Mindset. And there's implications as well for parenting. So I think it's interesting if you're trying to cultivate a growth mindset. Part of the implication is you don't just celebrate getting A's. You don't just celebrate when the team wins. You talk about, in every instance, like, what'd you learn? And that's actually the more important question from every activity that we do in life, is asking ourselves, like, what did we learn versus did you win? So there's implications, I think, in terms of the language that we use and what we do, if we really believe that growth mindset is the thing that we're trying to cultivate.
That's great. And for listeners, I'll add Mindset and all the other things we discuss in the show notes. One book that I'm reading right now, and I'm planning on actually doing a kind of book review episode on this, is John Maxwell's Failing Forward. And one of the underpinnings of that book is that, everything good comes from failure, but we're a very failure-averse culture. And so how to try to adopt a mentality of how to shift that view on failure so you're more willing to take those risks. That came to mind when you were describing Mindset, but I haven't checked that one out yet. I'll definitely read that one next.
Yeah. No, but Failing Forward is exactly that sort of mentality. And even, other literature on startups, like, the lean startup methodology, all those things are predicated on the speed with which you can find out what doesn't work, which is a process to figuring out what does work. And so there's just a lot of research that kind of grounds this conversation. And I think the mentality for a veteran is, the thought might be, and I think it's misinformed, is that, like, I'm supposed to sit in my basement, figure this whole thing out, make it perfect, and then I share it with the world. And I'm like, look, here it is. It's done. And a different approach is to sort of bring it into the world half-baked and allow for your customers, your users, the people that you're trying to impact, allow them to inform what the final product looks like. And that, that's supposed to be an iterative process in which we invite in people, as opposed to sort of build it in our basement and then say to the world, here it is, and I want you to like it, and I want you to buy it, and that we'll find out in the moment whether or not the business has worked. That's sort of a false approach to how to build a business.
I love that. And I think in my own story with Storybox, we started as a consumer video application and then became, a business to business photo marketing technology. And I think of in those early days, had we really perfected a consumer video platform for birthdays, all the time that would have been wasted, the entire platform got scrapped to go after the bigger insight that there was a business opportunity to sell this to marketers. And I love that thought. It's taking the minimum viable product to market, although it feels so vulnerable to put something out that's not great, but getting feedback and really gaining empathy for the users, and then based on that feedback, building what they really need. And so often people polish the Titanic and it doesn't end up going anywhere versus really figuring out where the core of the business needs to be and building in that direction.
Oh, I can't agree more. That's absolutely right. And I think this is also a learned behavior. So it's not something that I would say the more you do it, the easier it gets and the more instinctive it gets. And so, if you look at the greatest rates of entrepreneurship in this country, it's not amongst the millennials. It's amongst people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and for whom it's become a lifestyle. So they're just used to starting things. So the fact that, the boomers are actually the most prodigious entrepreneurs in this country, I think is very interesting, and it flies in the face of probably what we assume, which is that the millennials are the entrepreneurs. It's actually the folks that have been doing this stuff for a long time, and they like doing it. They get better at it each time, and it's just become a lifestyle for them. So here in Chicago, at the Bunker Labs, we got several guys who are Vietnam vets that are starting their 6th, 7th, 8th business, and they get better every time, and it gets easier every time. And so thinking of entrepreneurship not as a sort of like a one-time crack at the apple, you either made it, you don't, you have some huge exit and you go off and you retire, or you don't, is the wrong way to think about it. Thinking about it as a career skill that takes you throughout the next 40 years of your lives to creating new solutions, launching companies, being self-directed, I think for me, it's the right way to think about it, and it's also, I think, a more exciting trajectory as well.
I'm so torn because there's so many directions to go, and I want to hear more about the journey to starting Bunker Labs. But I want to start maybe with a deeper dive, and maybe treat the conversation as a deep dive on Bunker Labs, what you're doing, what you've learned there, and then we can get into the journey getting there. So maybe to start with those people on active duty and veterans who are listening who might not be familiar with Bunker Labs, how would you describe what you do as an organization?
So Bunker Labs helps military veterans start and grow their own business. When we say military veterans, we include military spouses. We also include kind of the broader military veteran community. We've got people in our programs who are children of veterans, and we've even got some civilians, but they're doing things in the veteran community. So we don't take that rigid of a definition of that. We want to be inclusive as an organization. So we're here to help you start and grow your own business. And then the question becomes, how do you do that? And this is where we've spent a lot of time thinking and studying and observing how to impact somebody who's trying to start a business. We've done a bunch of different things. We teach programs, we have webinars, we have a community app to connect our community, we have a lot of regular meetup events. We tell stories to inspire people that, hey, look, here's an entrepreneur who's a veteran who did something that you might want to go do at some point. We tell stories of entrepreneurs that are diverse. I think it's hard to become an entrepreneur if you think everyone looks like Mark Zuckerberg, and that they have to be a Harvard dropout. We know that coming out of the military, that just doesn't relate to most people that serve. We've got folks that are, they have families, they have kids, they've been deployed. They come from low socioeconomic communities where they don't know a lot of other entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurship looks different. It's not just Silicon Valley tech startups. So we've tried and done a lot of things, and here's really, our mission boils down to three things: inspire, educate, and connect. Those are the three things that we do as an organization. So inspire, to me, is all about how do we capture stories of people like you, Justin, that went out and started doing things. Hey, here's somebody who's a blogger. Talk to Justin. Look, Justin created a blog, and he gets several hundred people that listen to it, or podcast. that's inspiring. So if we can tell your story, then it's going to inspire other veterans. And I think we have an obligation to be a storytelling engine for the work that we're doing and for what entrepreneurs are doing. The next part of this is educate. I think educate is the obvious thing that people think of with entrepreneurship. But I think of it in a slightly different way. So education for me is not just about teaching business plan fundamentals, or here's how to build a pitch deck, or here's how to raise money from a venture capitalist. There's actually tons of education out there that's available for entrepreneurs. We're not, as an organization, ever going to be better at providing entrepreneurship organization than, say, the Kauffman Foundation or Harvard Business School or the Stanford Innovation Social Review or Techstars or any other organization whose sole job it is to produce entrepreneurship education. The education that I think we are trying to create is specific to the military veteran community. So how do we teach you how to go be self-directed around entrepreneurship? How do we actually teach you how to go find things like the Kauffman Founder School? Because if you can find that, we want you to learn how to find what's best in breed, which is always changing, by the way, right? Like the best resources today are not going to be what are the best resources in 5 years. So I think our education responsibility is really to ensure that you learn to be adaptive and self-directed and self-aware to go find the right resources when you need them to fill in your knowledge gaps. And I think that's actually the skill set that prepares you for lifelong learning more than it is just like, hey, here's the right way according to Bunker Labs about how to start a business. So that's, inspire and educate. And then the third thing, which I would actually argue is probably the most important pillar of our mission, is to connect. I think the military community is the most powerful alumni network in the world that doesn't have a good alumni association. And I think I look at the fact that, where I went to college, Northwestern or the University of Chicago, there's constantly introductions being made across that network. And even though I don't know the people that went to those schools, where I'm being introduced to them, I'm likely to take the introduction because it's coming out of the context of, hey, we did something. We at least went to the same school, even if it was at different times, but we have a sort of shared understanding as to what that means. The military, this is our secret weapon. I mean, this is, to me, what the military community has in spades is that, look, even though I was in the Navy and on ships, if a Marine who's enlisted calls me and says, hey, I need help, like I'm always going to prioritize that phone call. I'm always going to prioritize that introduction. And so I keep thinking, how do we make that opportunity available at scale? Because if we can connect the veteran community, and I like to actually call it the military alumni community, if we can connect that community, we can get anywhere we need to go in the world. We have veterans at every, in the C-suite, of almost all the Fortune 500. We have veterans that are working at prestigious venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. We have veterans that are working at, top banking institutions. We have veterans that are doing angel investing. We have veterans that have started and sold companies. We have veterans that have tech talent and can become interns for you or can become your employees. So all the elements are there. All the talent is there. And we have to, I think it's, our role as Bunker Labs is to create an organization where those disparate elements can come together and meet each other. Because if we can do that, we're going to unlock what is, I think, the greatest opportunity for the veteran community to start and grow businesses. And so, how we do that is really through great events, monthly meetups, big national events, thought leadership, conferences. And then we also do it through technology. We have a community app that has 2,800 people on it. We do it through introductions to people over email. We do it through our national leadership team network. And we also do it through our brand. People saying and having on LinkedIn, I'm involved in Bunker Labs, it means something. If you're in Jacksonville, Florida, and you're part of Bunker Labs, you can email, our board chair, who's in DC, who runs a private equity firm, and say, hey, I'm in Jacksonville. I'm involved with Bunker Labs. And I know you're the board chair. I'm asking for an introduction to somebody, and we'll make it happen. So the board is really, or the brand is a really important part of how we connect. The technology elements are a big part of how we connect. And then the events are a big part of how we connect. And I think that's, to me, I think the biggest, most exciting part of this mission is how we build that alumni network to support those interested in entrepreneurship.
Where did this all come from? Like, what was the genesis of Bunker Labs?
So the genesis is, so I was in the Navy. I was actually on the USS Bunker Hill, which is sort of a nod, if you will, or the namesake of the organization, Bunker Labs, is sort of a nod to the Bunker Hill, which I like to joke is named after a naval ship, which I'm, quickly reminded was named after an Army battle. Um, so, and really this started as like a simple idea. I was talking to some friends, Brandon Boder and Tom Day were part of the team in the early days. I was actually running my business that I had started prior to this thing, and was talking to the folks that run 1871, which is the big incubator in Chicago. And so, here I am as somebody who's running a small business, talking to the leaders at 1871, which is the big technology incubator in Chicago. And I said, hey, what have you guys thought about doing something for veterans and given that any thought? Because I think, I said, I don't know what the demand would be. I don't actually know that many veterans myself, but I'd be curious to know if there's interest there. And they kind of said, we think that there probably is interest there. We haven't done a whole lot, but we'd love to support you if that's something that you think, needs to be pursued. So I put together a PowerPoint and said, sure, let me give it some thoughts. And, the PowerPoint is sort of the beginning of the end of like how things happen. It always starts in a PowerPoint. And so put a PowerPoint together, created, sort of the initial name and circulated it around and shared it with some folks I knew at the mayor's office. And within like 6 weeks, we were announcing this, the creation of this new organization or this new initiative. It wasn't even an organization, but we announced it at the Pat Tillman Foundation luncheon. And that was about 3.5 years ago. And since then, we've just been on a learning journey. I mean, I thought this one would be a side project. I wasn't even envisioning that this necessarily would be a full-fledged organization. It just, to me, was as simple as, hey, if there's veterans hanging out at 1871 or in the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Chicago, we ought to just put them in a room, make sure they know each other, because then they can support each other. And it sort of just, went from there. And we've just been very mindful of like learning as we go, failing forward. I mean, really trying to practice what we preach, try things, see if they work, see if it's sustainable. If it's not, let's move on. That's okay. And that was about 3.5 years ago, and we've grown through a chapter model ever since. The next thing that happened after we launched was we got calls from leaders in other cities. Joseph Kopser, who's now running for Congress in Texas, said, hey, I'm in Austin, and I'm about to sell my company, and I want the Bunker Labs here in Austin. And so we said, cool, let's do it. And had the same conversation with Emily McMahon in D.C. and Mike Mayer in Philadelphia and other leaders who were veterans who kind of perked up from around the country and said, hey, that's cool. And, I'm a vet and let's do that. Let's do that same thing in this city. And so all the expansion since then has been totally organic. And today we're in 17 cities, including San Antonio, which we just launched on Friday.
That's incredible. That's really, it's really inspiring to see how you went about that and how, I think that's such a candid view of an entrepreneur journey where just kind of you took action and one thing led to another. And I think it speaks to the power of the veteran community and the willingness for people to pitch in and help and grow this. And I love how that goes back to that third pillar of connection. And it is true that the veteran community does not have a good alumni association, and yet it is the most willing to assist network I've seen, and it's just kind of hodgepodge together. So I love how you're forging that and making it easier for people to make those connections.
That's the hope.
One thing I was wondering about is, having seen so many entrepreneurs, veteran entrepreneurs go through the program at this point, are there any common misconceptions you see veterans have about starting a company?
Oh, that's a great question. There's lots of misconceptions. And I think some of them come from, being in the military brings assets and liabilities for how we learn. Of course, I believe it, fundamentally, you're a much better equipped leader. And so I think the first misconception is I think veterans underestimate their capacity to be successful. Starting a business is fundamentally about leadership. Like, it's just all about leadership. Like, everything is always and all about leadership. And so, and that's my bias, but I think it bears out. I mean, if you don't know how to take feedback, if you don't know how to create a clear vision, if you don't know how to articulate what you're trying to do, which to me is what leaders have to do, you can't be. It's hard to be successful as an entrepreneur. And so the fundamentals of leading and articulating a vision and building a plan and executing it with discipline, I mean, these are the basic building blocks of entrepreneurship, and military leaders, I think, have that in spades, by and large. Um, so that's one misconception I think veterans have of themselves. The other is that all startups are technology businesses. So, you know, I think, high growth tech enabled startups, the percentage of new businesses that are going to receive outside investment, I believe, is less than 4%. So you're talking about a very small 4%, right? A very small percentage of businesses where they're actually building pitch decks and going around and shopping it to investors and doing the circuit of trying to raise money from angel investors and venture capitalists. And so that's a very small subset of the population of companies that are startups. We know them very well because they end up being big companies like Airbnb and Uber and Lyft and brands that we are very familiar with, and that's a lot of what's happening in Silicon Valley. But the 96% of other businesses are things like I'm launching my own consulting business, a leadership development business. I'm opening up a food truck. I'm building a product. I've got an idea for a new clothing line. I've got an idea for how to build technology, take technology from the military that can be commercialized and sold to businesses, B2B professional services. So there's a lot of businesses out there that are going to be really successful. And it's not the next Facebook, but that's okay. And so if you have, I tell veterans all the time, like, if you have expertise, and you have a solution that you think the market needs, then you can be an entrepreneur. And if you have the discipline to stick with it and take the market signals if it's not working and be adaptable enough to change the plan if it's not working, you can be successful. So I think those are big misconceptions that the military community has of themselves. And, there's misconceptions that non-veterans probably have of veterans, but I don't think it's worth spending time thinking about that or worrying about that. The reality is nobody, being a veteran is, should neither be an asset and reliability when it comes to starting a business. The real question is the thing that you're building, does it have value? How do you know? Because customers are willing to spend money on it. I mean, that's just full stop. Those are the rules of the game. If you build something that people want to spend money on, then it's working. If you don't, then it doesn't add value, and you got to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to add value. And add value means people are willing to spend money. So, I think I think when we talk about veteran entrepreneurship, there's a misperception that we can think to ourselves that this is something different than entrepreneurship. And the reality is it's not. Starting a business is starting a business is starting a business. And, being a veteran might open some doors that you wouldn't otherwise be able to open. And you should use that. And that's what the Bunker Labs is actually here to help facilitate. At the same token, being a veteran is not sufficient to having a good business. Having a good business is sufficient to having a good business, and where we come from in our identities is just, it's context, it's background, and hopefully it opens up doors. But certainly shouldn't be a liability, and I don't think will be a liability if the business has merit itself.
That's great. I love that. I agree with what you're saying, and that I think that especially in today's popular culture, entrepreneurship is viewed as a very, very small slice of what it actually is. It is kind of hyper-focused on the tech startups when entrepreneurship takes on so many different forms and can come in so many different shapes and sizes. And I also really liked what you were saying about, also realizing that I had an interview in episode 109 with John Gossert, who's successfully started multiple startups after a full career in the military. And he was just talking about some of the veteran entrepreneurs he meets with come with a sense of entitlement that because they're a veteran, they're entitled to funding. And he kind of made the case that it is an asset in terms of discipline and integrity and in so many different ways, like leadership, like you were saying, but in no way does that make it easier to raise funding. It's just kind of assets that you have in your character rather than it doesn't really in any way qualify you for funding, more so than the next entrepreneur. So I thought that was a good point to point out as well.
Oh, that's great. And John is John's, just awesome. And he gets it. And, people often ask, like, well, how do we, we got to change the narrative of veterans. We change the narrative of veterans not by talking about changing the narrative, but by doing something that captures our attention. And so, fundamentally, like, changing the narrative about veterans isn't about talking about it; it's about doing something. And that's why I think the best thing we can do is just role model that here's what effective leadership looks like. And I have sort of which I'm very committed to, by the way. It's like I definitely want to change the narrative about veterans, and I want to do it not by saying let's change the narrative, but by showcasing how hard work and hustle and smart operational discipline and creative ideas executed by veterans like yields great businesses. Like, that to me is how you change the narrative. And for me, what I love is, we're an entrepreneurship organization. So if you ask me, like, who are your peers, I would tell you it's organizations like Future Founders. It's organizations like Wisdom, which is about women who are starting businesses. It's organizations like Blacks Who Code. It's organizations like Kauffman Foundation, 1 Million Cups, Techstars. I mean, so I view us as an entrepreneurship organization that happens to be founded by military veterans who are themselves entrepreneurs. And, in terms of how do we change the narrative, I'm like, I want to be the most effective entrepreneurship organization. I want people to say, wow, there's one organization in the entrepreneurship space that's really killing it, and it's the Bunker Labs. It happens to be, and it's the thing that's run by veterans. I want that narrative to be true, because it's a point of pride that I want to run a great organization, and then have the entrepreneurship space take notice and say, hey, if you want to know what it's like to run a good entrepreneurship organization, go call Bunker Labs, because they've done it well. And that's how we're going to change the conversation about veterans. It's that we step into the environment and we lead, and we demonstrate what leadership looks like. And that's the thing that sort of, I think, in the end is going to change the narrative about what it means to be a veteran and the assets that we bring.
That's great. That's great. What about if someone is listening, let's say they're on active duty, they've got a year or two left to go, how would you encourage them to think about their first move out of active duty? It seems like, a subset goes on to graduate school or business school. A subset might try to just initially start something out of the gates. A subset might try to go to another startup or another company to gain experience. Any advice you'd have on figuring out if their eventual goal is entrepreneurship, whether to go sooner or later or how to get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's such an obvious question, but it's a question that people aren't asking a lot. I think a few things. Number one is being on active duty is a great time to start thinking about it. I tell everyone that you ought to start a business while you still have a job. The best time to start start a business is when you still have a job. And so, de-risk entrepreneurship. So whether it's starting something while you're in the military or starting something when you're out of the military, keep your day job, whatever it is, and build a business at night. And how you do that requires some creativity, but it's a much better starting point than quit your job and start a business. Starting a business is not a go for broke exercise. It's not something that has to be like maxing out 19 credit cards. There's smarter ways to do it. So I think not thinking of this as a binary choice, which is, do I stay in the military or do I start a business? Do I get a job or do I start a business? Take the long view and say, I'm going to have a job. I'm going to maybe stay in the military. I'm going to maybe get a job, but I'm also going to think about the business I want to start. And then I would align your career search to be in the domain in which you think you want to start a business. So like my advice is, if you want to open a bakery, go work at a restaurant. That sounds dumb. And you might say, well, but if I work at a restaurant, I can only make, $30,000 a year. Whereas if I sell fax machines, I can make $45,000 a year. I would say go work at the restaurant, because you're trying to take the long view on the opportunity cost of what you ultimately want to do. So get a job working in the domain in which you think you might want to start a business, and get a job as close to the area in which you think you want to start a business as possible, because that's you getting paid to do on-the-job training for the business you want to go start. So I think if you want to start a business, I would probably tell you still focus on getting a job, but train your sites, train your job search on and working in the industry in which you want to ultimately start your own business, because you'll be so much smarter for it. If you want to do government contracting when you get out, or start your own veteran-owned, government contracting business, go work for a government contracting business and work in the sales function to understand how do small veteran-owned businesses go sell to the government. Like, learn that, and learn it by doing it for somebody else before you go and do it for yourself. You might decide you don't want to do it at all, so that's a good thing to learn, rather than getting out of the military and putting all your money and into this idea that you want to start a business. Make sure it's actually the business you want to start. So my advice is start thinking about it now. Find ways to actually try doing the thing that you want to do, even while you're still working in the military, and then build your network outside of the military. So only 1% of young people, join the military. So when you get out of the military, and are probably close to and understand the 1% of people that have worn the uniform, but you don't know the 99% of people that have not. So I would challenge you, get to the city, get to a place, get to the industry where you think you want to operate, and get active in those networking events. If you go to events that are 60% or more veteran, you're not going to build the network that you need to be relevant. So the best thing you can do is be the only veteran at an event. So going to a fintech conference, if you're interested in Bitcoin or blockchain, showing up at a sustainability conference if you're interested in local farming, get curious and show up to events where you're maybe the only veteran there, right? And that's a great thing, because what it'll do is it'll build your network, it'll stoke your curiosity. You'll begin to get calibrated about the language of the industry you're trying to enter. You'll begin to get calibrated for all the things that you don't know. But you have to be proactive and go figure that out. Like, the people that teach chap class, they don't know. Like, they just don't know where you got to go. And so you have to sort of become, build your own expedition, if you will, to go and find and search out those resources and those opportunities. But I think it's just about getting out. It's about getting out of the building. I think if you're 9 months out, I'd be at things 4 nights a week, just exploring. Go out in the world, go to meetups, go to a networking event, see what happens, go to an artistic performance, just broaden your horizons, because that will be the thing that accelerates your ability to discover what's ultimately going to be right for you.
Yeah, that's such a great point about the insular nature of the military and how you're exposed to just a very, very small subset of the population. And if your intention is to build an organization that services more people, you really have to just kind of get out and hit the pavement and hit those networking events. I love that thought of 4 days a week. Prior to that transition, just getting at these meetups and networking events. And I also really appreciated what you said about not quitting your day job. And I love the book by Elizabeth Gilbert called Big Magic. It's about creativity and building things that are new. And she talks about, not asking too much of your inspiration, not asking too much of your creativity, that not only does it need to give you this idea to build something new, but it also needs to pay your bills. And so she's also this advocate of, using nights and weekends and the early mornings and the nooks and crannies of your schedule to really grow an idea and build it up. And, so many of the people I've had on the show have talked about how it was years into a new organization until it was actually able to pay them a salary. And so if you're able to maintain your job and do this on the side, it just gives you more runway to actually lift off and get this thing off the ground, which in and of itself is such a massive undertaking.
Totally. And I think a great piece of advice is, whatever it is that you think you want to do, I think develop an operating thesis for, here's what I think I want to do, and then go find ways to do it for free. So I think I want to be a baker. Go bake. You actually like baking. Sounds dumb, but it's a step that a lot of people overlook. I think I want to go into consulting. Go find a small consulting firm and show up and be like, I want to help. I want to help for free. I make an argument that doing is the new resume. So the person that says, hey, I want to show up and I want to help you do this and I want to do it for free, is going to far outpace the person that says, here's my resume, tell me if you think I'm qualified. So going after opportunities and offering to do it for free is the best way to advance your network. It's how you get qualified, by the way, because now you have that thing on your resume. I helped develop a consulting project, and and you've now you've discovered if it is actually interesting to you, and you've found out whether or not you're good at it, right? So like all that suggests get out there and do it for free, and do it with people that are doing it well, and like put yourself into an internship, right? Like people aren't going to have an internship, but put yourself into an internship, and I think by doing that, you're going to very quickly accelerate the process towards aligning to your best and highest use.
That's great. I know that we're short on time, and I did want to delve a little bit into your background. You've had such a, in my perspective, a relatively atypical career path in getting here. And I'm wondering what you would want listeners to know kind of from active duty to starting Bunker Labs. Anything about that journey? In particular, we had started talking about the failures and any of the failures you experienced along the way that helped you get to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that you're going to battle all along the way is a decision between, are you going to honor what you perceive to be your reputational risk, which I would argue is other people's happiness, or are you going to honor your own happiness? And to me, like that is just what it boils down to. I was in San Antonio on this past week, and I went to a roundtable on Monday at the USO. And they run a great kind of program there called Pathfinder for helping kind of discover your next career. And he was talking about working with an O5 who was retiring after, I think, 25 years. And the O5 had an offer on the table. He thought it was less than he should be making. And he also just wasn't sure it was the right opportunity. And so, but he was going through this mental process because he was, I think, transitioning in like a few weeks. And ultimately what it boils down to is like the fear of I'm getting off of active duty and I don't have a job, and all the people back in active duty are going to maybe start to whisper amongst themselves, like, he doesn't have a job. Like, what happened to the O5? He doesn't have a job. But that's investing a lot in what other people think is the right answer. And the reality is other people don't know the right answer for you in your life. And I'm happy that the O5 ultimately said, I don't think it's the right opportunity. I'm going to spend this next 6 months doing more discovery, which is the reputationally hard thing to do, but it's ultimately the right thing to do. And I will tell you that, it always looks pretty on the other side. And you always get, frankly, celebrated on the other side, when it goes well. But it's not pursuing things that are going to put you on the front page of the alumni magazine that's going to matter. It's pursuing things that you think you really have a point of view on, where you really think you can bring something valuable to market. And doing that in the early years is almost always going to require you to do something that doesn't look clean, pretty, celebrated. It's going to look dirty. It's going to look maybe even humiliating, but that is part of the journey. So I would argue that the things that people think are holding them back, whether it's money or idea, it almost always boils down to a reputational investment. It's the moment when you go to update your LinkedIn to say, hey, I'm launching a children's tutoring business, and people don't see it coming. And it's like, whoa, this is out of left field. And there's fear and anxiety of like, I don't know. I'm nervous about announcing that I'm actually launching a blog. What if people don't like it? What if nobody tunes in? But those are the moments of truth in entrepreneurship. And I would just argue that that's more than anything what a veteran's going to wrestle with is like, I graduated business school. It's a top business school. What will it mean when I tell people that I'm turning down investment banking to go and start this food delivery app instead? Will people think I'm a fool, right? And that's almost always what it boils down to for people. Will people think I'm a fool for instead of taking on this safe job, I'm going to go launch a Subway franchise. Will people think that's silly? I'm an O4. People are going to think it's silly that I'm, going to make sandwiches at Subway. Who cares? Like, who cares? But that is ultimately, that's the battle that I think most people at some point have with themselves. And that is ultimately, I think, the thing that is going to hold you back. And I would just say, like, don't let it hold you back. And play for the long game, because at the end of the day, you're going to be glad you took those reputational risks early and arrived on the other side for the life that ultimately is about what you are designing for yourself and the destiny that you want to create for yourself.
That's great. For listeners, 2 episodes that come to mind on that, and I think that advice is so spot on. The first one was episode 40 with Annie Taft. I can think of no one else who's better embodies that thought of letting go of what people think. And Annie shares her story of going from active duty and actually going to culinary school, and the massive jump that was. She was planning on business school and decided to just follow, what really energized her. And she talks about, handing in her letter of resignation and kind of the embarrassment and shame she battled with as she was admitting that she was going to do something that no one else she had heard of had done at that point. And I also think of Jimmy Sopko, who left active duty and joined Pinterest, but he did it in a customer support role, which was a major step back in terms of both pay and seniority. Everyone, at the time he was 27, 28, had just been in command of naval warships and then was alongside 22 and 23-year-old kids straight out of college. And how that was kind of a blow to the ego, but ultimately got him where he wanted to go. And so I love this thought that Todd's sharing about letting go of what people think, letting go of what people think of you, and usually the case is they don't think of you, they're thinking about themselves. But I love that thought of investing and playing for the long game, and I think that's such great advice, whether you're going for entrepreneurship or whether you're going to just join a company. It's the same thing of just letting go of the comparison, letting go of the fear of what other people think, and just going after what's going to make you happy and get you where you want to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I could not agree more. And you'll be glad that you did on the other side. So I just encourage you to do it and find a buddy to do it with. And if you need a buddy, come to the Bunker Labs, because there's lots of folks that are in this journey together. And I do want to give a plug, Justin. We are starting a cohort the first week in January. It's called Launch Lab Online. It's an online experience. You can do it from anywhere around the world. And it's a 12-week process where we take you through the journey and a series of missions about how to start a business. It's really good stuff. There's awesome TED Talks. There's awesome podcasts. There's awesome articles, stuff from entrepreneur.com. There's self-assessments that you go through. So I think it's a really rich way to prepare yourself for the journey of entrepreneurship. And we've, videotaped a whole bunch of interviews with entrepreneurs, who are all veteran. And so if you're thinking about taking this journey, I would encourage you to go to bunkerlabs.org. You'll see the call to action to sign up for the Launch Lab cohort, and go ahead and apply, and we'll see you in January.
That's great. And for listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. Todd, I always like to keep the last question open-ended. And, I'll preface this, first of all, by just saying I feel like there's 3 more hours of questions I could ask, and I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And so for listeners, if nothing else, I hope that motivates you to check out Bunker Labs, what they're doing, and all of the resources and content that they have there. But I always like to keep the last question open-ended and say that, you've answered so many of my questions, and I would love to just give you the floor. If there's anything we haven't covered that you really want to leave listeners with, any sort of final words of advice or wisdom to share with listeners.
That's a good one. I think for most of the people listening, I would just tell you that everyone can be great. Not everyone can be a great entrepreneur, but everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And I think as you transition, give yourself some forgiveness for the mistakes that you'll make along the way. They're not mistakes; it's learning. It's okay to have the wrong job before you get the right job. Those compromises are going to be made in the journey. So it's not about perfection. It is about the number of at-bats. And so I would encourage you, make a volume of mistakes, make them quickly, because that's the thing that ultimately gets you towards the right destination. And so for me, my average time and rate is about 2 years doing anything. And I think the rapid mobility, which I think looks messy on a resume, I would argue is what allows me to sort of quickly learn where I can excel and get to the right place. So, have that forgiveness for yourself, and know that no decision is final, and you can change at any moment. And in fact, you probably will. So, I hope that gives people some breathing room to not have to get it perfect out of the gate. There's no such thing. and get comfortable with the journey of making mistakes, because they're not mistakes, it's learning. And so I just, give that to people as encouragement. And ultimately, like I'll say, there's a lot of people that will tell you like it's not worth your time. Don't take the chance. I will tell you, take the chance. Like I think like you get one life. Like if there's a lot of resistance to starting your own business, but I hope that Bunker Labs serves as a counterweight of inspiration that this is in fact something that you are capable of and you should explore if you have a dream of doing it. And I always want to be that voice that encourages you to push forward and try it, because I know that the resistance otherwise is in the other direction. So I hope that encourages folks. And again, anything that we can do at Bunker Labs to support you in that journey, that's what we're here for.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you, Justin.
Surface, surface, surface.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out the show notes. In particular, I call out a couple different interviews in this episode. John Gossert, Annie Taft, Jimmy Sopko, Chris Shaw. All of them are great listens. All of those, except for John, are pretty early episodes if you hadn't had a chance to check them out. So check out the show notes. You'll find links there to each of these. A quick plug for Bunker Labs cohort. To sign up for that or to apply for that, it launches in January. Sounds like an incredible resource, and I hope that Todd's interview just whet your appetite to learn more about entrepreneurship and connect with other veterans. If you haven't had a chance to pre-register for Veterans in Consulting or pre-programming, that launches in January. Make sure you sign up for that today. Also, make sure you sign up for our newsletter. I'm using that more and more to get feedback on how to improve the show, where to take this, and how to help you more. Lastly, if you haven't had a chance to leave us a review on iTunes, I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. It's the most effective way I've found to get this in front of more people on active duty and more veterans. So definitely just take the 30 seconds to do that if you haven't already. Thanks. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with veterans about their civilian career. Take care.